Stand up right now if you are able. Close your eyes and just stand there for 10 seconds. Most of you reading this in your 60s or beyond just felt something you did not expect. A little sway. A little reach for the counter that was not there a few years ago. You opened your eyes fast, didn't you? That small wobble in the dark is not nothing. It is your body telling you quietly that one of the 3 systems it uses to keep you upright is not sending its signal the way it used to. And for a great many older folks, that failing signal has almost nothing to do with their ears or their muscles or simple old age the way everybody assumes. It has to do with one vitamin, a cheap one, a common one, and a shortage of it that almost nobody thinks to check for until after the fall has already happened. 14 million Americans over the age of 65 go down in a fall every single year. 1 out of every 4 older folks you know. Falls are the leading cause of injury death past 65 now, ahead of car wrecks, ahead of every other accident they keep records on, and the death rate from falling has climbed sharply over the last several years, not dropped. 83 out of every 100 hip fracture deaths trace straight back to a fall. 43,000 of our older Americans died from a fall in a single recent year. I am not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you this because I want you angry, the same kind of angry I got when I learned what I am about to hand you, which is that a great deal of that unsteadiness, that sway, that creeping fear of the stairs, is caused by something a $15 blood test would catch in an afternoon, and almost nobody thinks to ask for it. My name is Esther. My husband Elias keeps the farm running. I keep the kitchen, the garden, and I keep an eye on the older folks in our community, the way my mother kept an eye on hers. And over the years, I have watched grown sons and daughters stand in a doorway and tell their mother or their father, "Well, you're just getting older." That's all it is. The balance goes when you get up there in years. I believed that myself for a long time. I do not believe it anymore. Not because getting older does nothing to the body, it does plenty, but because I have watched too many of our own elders go from steady to shaky to falling, and then watched a doctor run one simple test and turn the whole thing around inside a few months. That is not a guess on my part. That is something the medical men have known for decades and have been slow to act on, and I am going to walk you through exactly why and exactly what to do about it, plain, the way I would tell it to my own mother. Before I go any further, I want to tell you that I have gathered the seasonal remedies, the household economies, and the family health watching my mother and grandmother taught me into a book over on eliasyoder.com. I will not bring it up again in this. What I am about to tell you here costs you the price of a blood draw and maybe a bottle of vitamins, and I want you to have all of it whether you ever look at that book or not. Now let me tell you how your body actually keeps you standing up, because once you understand the 3 legs of that stool, the rest of this makes plain sense. The first leg is your eyes. They tell your brain where the floor is, where the wall is, where the step down begins. The second leg is the little organs deep in your inner ear, the ones that sense when your head tips or turns, the way a level on a carpenter's bench shows him when a board is true. The third leg, the one almost nobody has ever heard explained to them, is the nerve signal running up from your feet, your ankles, your knees, telling your brain exactly where your legs are in space without you having to look down and check. That third leg has a name. The doctors call it proprioception. Think of it as a kind of inner sense of your own body's position, working every second you are upright, mostly behind the curtain where you never notice it at all. Here is why I had you close your eyes and stand a moment ago. When your eyes are open, all 3 legs of that stool are holding you up together, and a weak leg can hide behind the other 2. The eyes paper over the gap. But the moment you close your eyes, you take away one whole leg of support, and if the leg carrying the signal from your feet is already weak, that is the moment you feel the sway. Folks who fall most often are not falling because their eyes went bad and not because their inner ear quit. Far more often than anybody tells them, they are falling because that quiet signal running up the legs has gone faint, and they never knew it was there to lose in the first place. I think of those 3 legs the way I think of a milking stool out in the barn. Take away one leg entirely, and the stool falls over the moment you sit on it. Weaken one leg just a little, and the stool still stands, but it leans, it wobbles under any shifting weight, and a body sitting on it learns without ever quite noticing to lean their own weight toward the 2 good legs to keep from going over. That leaning is exactly what an unsteady older person is doing without knowing it. They start walking a little wider in the hips. They start reaching for the counter, the door frame, the back of a chair, not because they decided to, but because some old, quiet part of the brain figured out on its own that the 3rd leg of the stool had gone soft and started compensating for it years before anyone in the family noticed a thing. So what makes that signal go faint? The nerves running from your feet up to your spine and on up to your brain are wrapped in a kind of sheathing, a fatty insulation, very much the way the copper wire running to your porch light is wrapped in rubber. That insulation is what lets the signal travel clean and fast without leaking or scattering along the way. The body builds and maintains that insulation using a handful of nutrients, and the single most important one, the one that breaks down fastest when it runs short, is vitamin B12. When B12 runs low for long enough, that insulation starts to thin and fray, most noticeably on the longest wires in your body, which happen to be the nerves running all the way down to your feet. A frayed wire still carries some signal. It just carries it weaker, slower, and less precise. You do not feel a jolt or a shock when this happens. You feel something much quieter and much easier to dismiss. You feel a little less sure of the floor under your feet than you used to. I want to tell you about a woman from our own church, because her story is the one that finally made all of this click for me, and it is not an unusual story. It is an ordinary one, which is exactly the point. She was past 70, sharp as ever in conversation, baking her own bread every week of her life. Over about a year, her family noticed she had started reaching for the wall going down her own hallway, something she had never done before. She told her daughter it was just her knees. Her doctor, a good and careful man, ran a basic blood count, and it came back fine, because a basic blood count does not look for this particular shortage unless somebody specifically asks. It was almost a year before a different doctor, hearing her describe how much steadier she felt with her eyes open than closed, ordered a B12 level. It came back low. Not dramatically low, the kind of low that doesn't always show up as the textbook anemia doctors are trained to look for first. Within a few months of treatment, her daughter told me, her mother stopped reaching for that hallway wall. That is not a miracle cure, and I will not sell it to you as one. It is what the medical literature on this has shown for years now, that a meaningful share of unsteadiness and so-called dizziness in older people traces back to exactly this, and that catching it early enough lets a good amount of that nerve damage heal. Catching it late, after years of low levels, means the improvement is real, but it is not always complete. I will not promise you more than that, because honesty is the only thing worth anything in a video like this one. Now, why does this particular shortage hit so hard after 60, when most of you ate plenty of meat and eggs and milk your whole lives and never gave B12 a single thought? Here is the part almost nobody explains to folks, and once you hear it, you will understand your own parents and maybe your own self a great deal better. Vitamin B12 does not simply walk into your bloodstream the moment you swallow a piece of chicken. It is bound up tight inside the protein of the meat, the egg, the cheese, and it takes a strong dose of stomach acid to cut it loose so your gut can grab hold of it. Stomach acid is like the fire under a kettle. A young stomach keeps a hot, steady fire. An older stomach, more often than most folks realize, lets that fire burn low. The doctors call the condition atrophic gastritis, and it becomes common as people pass their 60s and 70s, quietly, without any pain to announce it. A lower fire means less acid. Less acid means the B12 never gets cut loose from your dinner, And you can eat a perfectly good diet full of meat and eggs your whole life and still slowly starve for this one vitamin simply because your own gut has gotten too gentle a fire to free it up. It does not stop there. A great many medicines that older folks take every single day make the problem worse on top of it. Metformin, the most common pill given for type 2 diabetes, is well documented to lower B12 levels the longer a person stays on it. The acid-reducing medicines so many people take for heartburn and reflux, the ones with names ending in prazole, work by turning that stomach fire down on purpose, which helps the heartburn and quietly starves the B12 absorption at the very same time. Nobody is doing wrong by prescribing these. They are good medicines for what they treat, but almost nobody pairs them with a reminder to check B12 once a year. And that gap is where this whole problem hides in plain sight, inside a system that is otherwise taking good care of people. I think of a man I know who farmed not far from here for most of his life, strong as anybody half his age right up until his 70s, the kind of man who walked his own fence line twice a week out of plain habit. He had taken the same heartburn pill every night for going on 12 years, the kind that comes in a little purple capsule, because it worked. And why would he ever think to stop something that worked? Nobody connected that pill to the way he started favoring his cane on uneven ground, or the way his feet fell to sleep most mornings, until he had been up and moving a good half hour. His own children chalked it up to the years catching up with him, the way children often do, with love but without the right question behind it. It was a visiting nurse, of all people, going through his medicine cabinet for an unrelated reason, who asked when anybody had last checked his B12. Nobody had. Not once in 12 years on that pill. I tell you that story not to scare you off a medicine that is doing real good for your heartburn, but to show you exactly how quietly this slips past people who are otherwise being careful and well cared for. Put the numbers together and you start to see how big this really is. Counted the strict way, by the numbers the laboratories flag as outright deficient, something like 1 in every 10 people past 60 is short on B12. Counted the looser way, including the folks running low but not yet low enough to set off alarm bells on a standard lab report, the share climbs as high as 1 in 3 in some studies, and higher still among people living in nursing facilities, where appetite often drops and stomach acid drops right along with it. One of the medical journals that studies this in older patients put it plainly. The condition is common, often missed entirely, because the signs are subtle and easy to blame on something else. That is not me talking. That is what the people who study this for a living have been saying for going on 30 years now. So how would you even know if this is happening to you or to somebody you love? The signs are quiet and they creep in slowly, which is exactly why they get waved off as ordinary aging. A tingling or a numbness in the toes that comes and goes. Feet that feel a little wooden, a little disconnected, especially first thing getting out of bed. A noticeable difference in steadiness between walking through a bright room and walking through a dim hallway at night, because in the dark, the eyes can no longer cover for that weak third leg of the stool. A tongue that feels sore or unusually smooth, a tiredness that rest does not seem to fix, and yes, a wobble standing with the eyes closed that was not there a few years back, the very thing I had you test for at the start of this. None of these on their own proves anything. Together, especially the unsteadiness that gets worse in low light, they are exactly the pattern the doctors are trained to look for, and exactly the pattern that gets brushed aside as nothing more than getting old. Now I have to stop here and say something plainly, because I would be doing you a disservice if I let this run on without it. Balance trouble is not always this vitamin, and I will not have you sitting at home assuming it is and skipping the doctor over it. There are a great many causes of unsteadiness in older folks, some of them in the inner ear, some of them in the blood pressure dropping when you stand, some of them in the medicines a person takes for entirely other reasons, and some of them far more serious than a vitamin shortage. If unsteadiness comes on sudden, in minutes or hours rather than slowly over months, and especially if it comes along with a drooping on one side of the face, slurred speech, Sudden weakness down one arm or one leg, sudden trouble seeing, or a headache unlike any you have had before. You do not wait, and you do not call your regular doctor's office for an appointment next week. You call for an ambulance that same minute. Those are the signs of a stroke, and with a stroke, minutes decide how much of a person comes back afterward. I would rather you read this whole paragraph twice and remember it than remember anything else I tell you today. For the slow, creeping kind of unsteadiness, the kind that has been building for months or years, the right next step is a simple conversation with your doctor and a request for a blood test. Ask for vitamin B12 by name, because the standard blood panel most doctors run as a matter of routine usually does not include it unless somebody asks. If the level comes back borderline rather than clearly low, a good doctor can also check something called methylmalonic acid, which often shows a shortage starting to cause trouble in the nerves, even while the plain B12 number still looks technically acceptable. This is not an expensive test, and it is not a hard one. It is a single blood draw, the kind you have had 100 times in your life, and the answer it gives you is worth more than every fall alarm necklace and grab bar you could buy without ever finding the actual cause underneath. If the test does come back low, here is what the fix actually looks like, plainly and honestly, with no miracle talk attached to it. For a mild shortage caught early, a doctor will often start with a B12 supplement you take by mouth, sometimes a very high dose, because it turns out the gut can absorb a small slice of B12 directly without needing that worn-out stomach fire at all, simply by flooding it with enough of the vitamin that some gets through regardless. For folks whose levels are quite low or who have the condition called pernicious anemia, where the body has stopped making the helper substance needed to absorb B12 from the gut altogether, the doctor will often go straight to an injection given in the muscle, sometimes weekly at first and then monthly for the rest of that person's life. That sounds like a great deal until you set it beside 14 million falls a year, and it costs only a few dollars a dose at the pharmacy. There are also sublingual tablets that dissolve under the tongue, which some doctors favor, because a portion of the vitamin can move into the bloodstream straight through the tissue there, skipping the gut's trouble altogether. And do not overlook your plate while you wait on any of this. Beef liver, clams, sardines, and other fish carry a great deal of B12 naturally. Eggs and dairy carry a fair amount. Fortified breakfast cereals carry a form of the vitamin that does not need to be cut loose from protein the way meat does, which makes it easier on an older stomach with a low fire under it. None of this replaces a proper test and a proper treatment if you are already deficient, but it is worth knowing where the vitamin actually lives. There is one more honest word of caution I want to leave with you here, because I have seen well-meaning families get this part backward. A great many of the all-in-one senior vitamins on the store shelf carry a heavy dose of folic acid alongside whatever small amount of B12 they happen to include. Folic acid is its own good nutrient, and I will not speak against it. But taken in a large dose by someone who is actually short on B12, it can quiet down the blood signs a doctor would otherwise use to catch the shortage, even while the nerve damage underneath keeps right on creeping forward unannounced. That is not a reason to fear your vitamins. It is a reason to get the blood test first, before you start dosing yourself with whatever bottle looked promising on the shelf, so you and your doctor both know exactly what you are treating, instead of guessing at it from outside. Now, how fast does this turn around? Because I promised you honesty, and I intend to keep that promise. Many people notice the tiredness lifting within a few weeks of starting treatment, sometimes faster than that. The tingling in the feet often eases over a similar stretch of time. The deeper nerve healing, the kind that restores that quiet signal running up from your feet to your brain, that takes longer, often several months, and in folks who went a long time before anybody caught it, the improvement is real, but it is not always complete. The nerve sheathing I described to you earlier can regrow, but it regrows slowly. The way a fence line grown over with brambles takes a whole season of steady cutting back before it looks like a fence again. The lesson in that is not to lose hope. The lesson is to stop waiting. Every month this goes unchecked is a month that fraying gets a little further along, and every month it goes treated is a month closer to getting that signal back. I want to tell you why this stays so quiet, because I do not believe there is a villain sitting in an office somewhere choosing to keep this from you. It is simpler and a little sadder than that. There is no money in a $15 blood test and a bottle of vitamins that costs less than a cup of coffee a week. There is a great deal of money in fall alert pendants, in stair lifts, in the long, slow business of rehabilitation after a hip breaks, in every product built to manage the consequences of falling, rather than the quiet cause sitting underneath it. One of the journals that studies older patients put it almost exactly this way: that the condition is common and serious, and still gets overlooked in everyday medical practice, because the warning signs are so easy to mistake for plain old age. Nobody decided to keep that quiet on purpose. It simply never became anybody's job to ask the question, and a thing that is no one's job to ask becomes a thing that gets missed year after year, family after family, until somebody falls. So here is exactly what I want you to do, plain and in order, the same way I would tell my own sister. If you or somebody you love past 60 has noticed a change in steadiness, especially worse in the dark or with the eyes closed, write down when it started and how it has changed, because your doctor will want that. Call and ask for a blood test and say the words vitamin B12 out loud so it actually gets added to the order, because otherwise it likely will not be. If you take metformin or one of the heartburn medicines ending in prazole, ask whether your B12 ought to be checked once a year as a matter of course, because for a great many people on those medicines, it should be. Eat toward the vitamin while you wait on results, the eggs, the dairy, the fish, the fortified cereal in your own cupboard. And if the test does come back low, follow your doctor's plan all the way through, the tablets or the injections or the under-the-tongue drops, and give the nerves the months they need to mend rather than judging the whole thing after 2 weeks and giving up. And please hear this one more time before you go. The slow, creeping unsteadiness is very often this. The sudden, sided, all-at-once unsteadiness with weakness or slurred words, or a strange new headache is something else entirely, and it means call for help right now, not later today, not tomorrow morning. Tell me in the comments below whether anyone in your family has gone through this, whether it was caught early or caught late, and what the doctor found when they finally asked the right question. Tell me, too, if you are the one taking the heartburn pill or the diabetes pill I mentioned, and whether your own B12 has ever once been checked in all the years you have been on it, because I suspect a great many of you are about to find out it has not. I read every one of these, and the stories you send back teach the next family more than I ever could on my own. Next time, I want to sit down with you and go through the other quiet shortage that creeps up on older folks the same way this one does, the one tied to muscle weakness and the dread of the dark hallway at 3 in the morning, and what an honest, inexpensive plan for that one looks like too. Until then, stand a little taller, ask for the test you have never thought to ask for, and remember that the ground under your feet is steadier than you think, once the signal telling you so is finally working the way it should.